2012. I'm currently the Director of Partnerships for the Washington Technology Industry Association, which is a tech trade association like a chamber of commerce, and it means I'm in charge of all the revenue to make sure we get to do the work. My pronouns are she, her.
Hi, I'm Kristen Holloway Arterburn. My pronouns are she, her. I graduated Evans in 2011. And I currently run my own business. I'm an executive leadership coach and a change management consultant. But prior to launching my business a couple of years ago, I spent many years at Google, and most recently in their HR department, leading large scale change initiatives.
Hi, everybody. My name is Isa Hirata. I use she, her pronouns. Actually, I'm a relatively recent Evans grad. I graduated in 2023, and I work at Burke Consulting as an associate. So this was actually my first job out of grad school. And Burke Consulting is a interdisciplinary consulting firm. So I focus on policy, strategy, and land use planning, but we have other focus areas. We have lots of Evans alums at the company, and our large kind of contracts are with the public sector. So we largely work with cities, counties, and state agencies, specifically in Washington.
Awesome. And I realized I didn't introduce myself. My name is Rachel Young Sato. I use she, her pronouns, and I currently serve as the Career Development Program Manager. Thank you all for introducing yourselves, and I'm glad that you are here. We wanted to start off on kind of a overarching question. We'd love to hear about why you started in your field and how you got there.
I can kick off. So yeah, like I mentioned, I graduated relatively recently in 2023. So kind of the how of how I got into the field that I'm in, which is kind of public sector consulting, has a lot to do with Evans. I graduated from undergrad and then worked in a bunch of different kind of sectors and jobs for about 6 years before I went back to grad school. So I did definitely a career pivot coming to Evans. And so, yeah, I definitely credit Evans for where I'm at in terms of the sector and also my role. And in terms of the how, my last year at Evans, I worked at the city of Shoreline as their fellow, so in their city manager's office. And towards the end, it was a year-long fellowship. And towards the end, I was talking to my manager and she was asking, like, what have you enjoyed doing at the city of Shoreline and what do you want to do more of? Kind of helping me think about what's next post graduating. And I talked about what I really liked, and I talked about loving like the analytical part of it, kind of gathering information through interviews and research and synthesizing it. And then I also talked about things that I wish I'd been able to do and things I didn't get to do. So I talked about wanting to do more community engagement and feeling like there's so much more that we could do to equitably engage folks in local kind of government. So she kind of was like, that is consulting. A lot of what you're talking about in terms of what you've liked at City of Shoreline and what you're looking for oftentimes gets contracted out to consultants. And so that was, she kind of gave me that aha moment of if I'm looking for specific skills and things that I've enjoyed, a lot of it is in consulting. And then I actually first found out about Burke Consulting at Evans through the, I believe it was the financial management and budgeting class where they had alums come and talk about their work in the finance sector, and somebody from Burke was there. So it was kind of on my radar at the time. So I think, yeah, it's a combination of Evans and that experience, and then also just figuring out what I liked in the local government, and then kind of going from there.
I love that. There's a little bit of a through line with our careers in terms of consulting. For me, I've always been happiest when I'm helping others achieve their highest potential. So whether that's as an individual or as a team, and I really get excited about helping people identify the root causes of issues that are holding them back and then make a plan to overcome them. And so when I went to Evans, I was a little bit older than others in my class. I was 32 or something like that at the time. And I had, I know, and I was like the mama bear, you know, like not really ancient, but anyway, I had already been in the private sector when I went to Evans, and Barry Wall, who happened to be the career services, I think, director at the time, as well as my favorite professor, David Harrison, really said, I think you should go into consulting. This is like a great bridge career for you. So I had been working in philanthropy for about 5 years post Evans, and I was doing management consulting, working with boards, funding partnerships, and executive development. And I really wanted to take what I was learning about collaboration and complexity and apply it to an international context. I had always wanted to go into international development, and some family circumstances meant I couldn't move abroad. And so I was lucky that Google had an opening here in Seattle to lead an international effort, bringing 11 teams together from 11 countries to create a shared business model and a learning curriculum, and to shift the culture from one of competition to collaboration. So it really like dovetailed very well with the Evans curriculum. But my intention with going to Google, I had been at Google, by the way, secret prior to Evans, going back to Google was I wanted to get into the HR department. And so after a couple of years, I did. And there I was really fortunate to lead company-wide change management efforts for things like overhauling their performance management system, probably sounds familiar with your curriculum, and then also with the recruiting organization. And I led an org that did comms and employee and stakeholder engagement and learning program design, et cetera. And what I found was doing that work, I found my most joy in, once again, working one-on-one and with small teams, particularly with executives in my own org, on helping them reach their highest potential. So I decided that while I was working, I was going to make my business plan, I was going to launch my own business and receive more training so I could launch my executive coaching business, which I did 2 years ago. And today I am coaching like mid to senior level executives, really to, again, overcome barriers to success and take decisive action. Predominantly, my clients are in mission-driven fields. I've been privileged to be able to do this. So I'm working mostly with nonprofit leaders, philanthropy, healthcare, some government. And whether it's leadership impact, career transitions, or navigating complex change, which is pretty much a constant as a leader. That's really where I'm focused now.
Yeah, Evans alumni students, we like to solve problems, and I'm just the same as these other two ladies on this call. For me, I've spent my entire career asking for money. So I was 29, I think, was when I came into the Evans school, and I worked full time and went to Evans, so it like wasn't in just the cohort traditionally, but I had been 5 years or more in fundraising and realized that I really wanted to be a leader in nonprofits. So my coursework definitely aligned with the nonprofit leadership sort of role. In looking at the Evans, I always knew I was going to get an advanced degree. I have an overeducated family, and it's just that it just that was going to happen. And I definitely spent a lot of time thinking very carefully about, did I want to get an MBA, an MPA, or a CFRE, which is a certified fundraising executive, like certificate. And I, nonprofit leadership, I definitely went with the MPA, but now I graduated in 2012. It's been 13 years since I've been in the Evans School, but I can even see in the work that I've got, the colleagues I work with MBAs, and there's something special, and it's probably it's part of my next answer of why Evans is so great compared to MPAs. But the way I got into my role now was like a happy accident mixed with me being open to opportunity. I kind of tripped over somebody who was hiring for this really weird, we're a nonprofit. We're a 501c6, which is a nonprofit that can lobby. But we are run by a bunch of corporate folks. I came in and I was the only nonprofit-y person in there, and we work really closely with for-profits. So our stakeholder group includes the tech sector in Washington, which is big, Yay, Google. It includes the academic sector, right? Getting people ready for roles in tech and helping to fill that talent pipeline, and then also strong connections to the public sector. So it, my job makes me crazy, but I still love it. It's been 5 years, and what I keep coming back to is like how I got here is being open to something a little bit different, learning more, and then seeing the opportunity in that, in that happenstance. I don't know if I answered the question just right, but that's where I ended.
That was great. Yeah, it's great to hear all the different ways people ended up where they are. But it's a great segue to the next question of what experiences best prepared you for your current work? Was it classes? Was it a random volunteering you did, being in a committee, an internship? We'd love to know, as students are trying to build their portfolios to become attractive to those recruiters or to those different positions. What helped you get to where you are?
Kristen told us her favorite, her favorite professors. Mine was Stephen Page. I love that man. And even like, again, I've been out of school for a while, like Moore's Triangle and stakeholder engagement is something, I don't say it out loud, but I chuckle to myself in my head. That absolutely prepared me very, very well. Not only, again, like I was a traditional nonprofit fundraiser and traditional nonprofit after getting my MPA and sort of then shifted into this weird role more recently. But in particular, the work that we do, whether it's nonprofits or government, involves a need for us to rally a diverse stakeholder group, folks who love us, who hate us, and also folks who just don't really care very much. And that's something that, again, looking at like Moore's Triangle and stakeholder engagement was the starting block of what is now my superpower. When I look at the unique value I bring to my organizations and looking across my like group of colleagues, that is something that they don't have or can't see. And it's something that I think is unique to an MPA, which is far different than an MBA.
Isa, you want to go?
No, you go first. I'll go after you.
Okay. I just love that you said that, Christina, because I don't know that it clicked for me until I heard you say that has also been my superpower, stakeholder engagement. And I had Mary Kate Gugerty, I think, for that class, who was near and dear to my heart. So +1, as they say in tech, I don't know if they say it anywhere else, to what you just said. But I would say for me, if I think on my Evans career and what prepared me, or my Evans cohort and what prepared me, I was a couple things. One, I was part of the EPAR, the Evans Policy Analysis and Research Fellowship. And I think working for Gates Foundation with Lee Anderson and Mary Kay Gugerty, and then also doing my capstone at the Seattle Foundation, really helped me understand. It was like a good bridge for me into eventually going back to the private sector, because there's just a speed and a rigor and a clarity required to work with most of these people who came from a corporate background. So those were foundational experiences for me. I perseverate, and they just like 80% is good enough, like get it done. And so that was kind of, I really got that indoctrinated in me. I would say also the nonprofit management certificate, like bar none, I'm so glad I did that. It set the groundwork for understanding how to do strategy design, program management. These are like exceptionally important skills in any career. It helped me understand not only stakeholder engagement, but governance and decision-making, which has really had a through line in my career, and has served me really well. And then finally, in terms of the finance classes, I use them I run my own business. And I mean, I have to, that stuff is so important to me, like all the modeling. I was surprised at how quickly it came back over a decade later to be able to leverage everything I learned while I'm not doing government accounting, but that's way more difficult than what I'm doing. But it helped me have the confidence that I could set up and run my own business.
I love that even though I graduated 10 years after you both, the professors that you were mentioning are still, at least when I was there, was still there, and the concepts that you both are talking about are definitely familiar to me. So it's cool to, yeah, 10 years later, there's still a through line in terms of our education, which is really interesting. I think for me, it wasn't really like necessarily a particular class that I think best prepared me, but the interdisciplinary aspect of the education. In my current job, I'm very much a generalist, and so I find myself in one day working on not only completely different topics from like transportation to housing to strategic planning, but I also do such different tasks. So, like, just an example from today, I was working on creating a survey, and then I was in interviews, and then I was analyzing those interviews and thinking about key takeaways, and then putting together an engagement plan for a totally different project. So, I find myself doing so many different things, and I think that Evans really prepared me to like tackle problems and think strategically. And I think that that's kind of a huge takeaway that I had from the education there was just like I feel like I have a really solid foundation of how I approach new topics and new concepts, and how to like work collaboratively with others. I think another thing that I found really useful and what prepared me was that during my time at Evans, I always had like a fellowship or an internship. And I talked a little bit about during my second year, I worked at City of Shoreline, and that in particular was super helpful to be able to be in class, learn about different concepts, and learn about kind of like local government as an example, and then actually be at the City of Shoreline and to be able to see that in practice and to be talking about those concepts in a real world situation. So I think for me, the second year like really brought home a lot of the concepts just because I was able to see it in practice. So if there's anybody here that's it's still a first year and thinking about doing like an internship that really aligns with the curriculum, I would super recommend it. And if there's also anybody who's a first year who's looking for a fellowship for your second year, the City of Shoreline, their fellowship, they've been doing it every year for the last, I think, 6 years, is just like an amazing exposure to local government and just a super amazing professional development opportunity. So if you have any questions about that as well, feel free to ask me later.
There's another thing I thought of, and Kristen, I couldn't remember, did they call them memos or rubric or frameworks or one of those? But
Yes.
there was projects that we worked on, and they were super valuable because I remember spending hours and hours of like doing research and understanding the problem and understanding the stakeholders and coming up with options and figuring out the pros and the cons and then coming to a recommendation. And then after you dumped hours of work and sweat into this project, the product is actually a teeny little concise, like it doesn't show you how smart you are and all the work you did. It just shows your recommendation. But that skill is something I use regularly as I'm kind of, I don't think it's unique. I think corporate, you have to manage up, down, and sideways. You sure as hell do in nonprofits. But that skill has been tremendously helpful when I'm talking to a board or trying to convince somebody to do something, but I've done all the work. They haven't seen all the work, but when they ask questions, then I have my answers right away. And then it gives me instant credibility and enables me to help help drive change in the organization, even if I don't necessarily have a seat. Like I want to be a COO, right? That's what I'm working towards. I'm not a COO, but you better believe that I'm still making those recommendations and that analysis, and people are seeing me for it.
I love that. Rachel, I just want to can I make a quick comment about something that Isa said too, which I loved, and Christina and I were like texting in the chat. I think there's a stigma with being a generalist, at least I might be projecting on all of you with that, but I know, so I'll just own my own bias where I always thought, well, I need a PhD to be taken seriously, especially working for a corporation that values an Ivy League education and a PhD. So I had this sort of scarcity mindset. And I finally realized, no, actually, my generalist but exceptional education at Evans has prepared me to do so many different jobs in a for-profit institution that I am more marketable, to Christina's point in chat, and flexible than many other people. And so I would just want to say that I think the tone on that is shifting. And I believe that there was even an article recently in the Harvard Business Review about that, saying like generalists are where it's at. So just a little bit of a plug to feel proud about that.
Yeah, I think that's really important to think about, how are we able to share the skills and the background that you have and portray it in the best way possible to those job applications and to those recruiters. So yeah, talking about the benefit of being a generalist versus how it might be working against you, I think is important to learn how to articulate. Moving on to my next question, I'd love to know what was, if you had one, a pivotal moment or lesson that you learned that shaped your professional journey. Was there like a big mistake or a big win that you had, a project you were really proud of? I'd love to hear those moments.
Fine. Okay. I'm an optimist and an energetic and enthusiastic, but my story actually comes from a moment of disappointment. Justin will get it because she's an advancement, and maybe there's some other fundraisers here. But in the world of fundraising, like Major Gifts is where it's at. It's the highest ROI. It's makes a huge impact. Anyways, I was working at this global or nonprofit organization, and I brought in a $500,000 gift, and that was all me. Like the whole thing was all me, and it was amazing, and it was the biggest commitment I had ever secured in my career, and one of the biggest commitments that the organization had gotten. And yet, at the end of the day, that $500,000 gift didn't change the operations of the organization or the impact of the organization. And that's where I realized, and again, I got my MPA because I knew I wanted to be more than just a fundraiser, but it really helped me see the importance of the advanced training and being in a leadership role to help organizations make the changes they need so that the fundraising staff and the program staff and the board members can all be better connected and better motivated, which makes their work better, which makes the organization's impact and outcomes better.
Yeah, I think for me answering this question is more of a lesson learned. I'm someone that has had a very windy career path. So Christina and Chris and I resonate because I worked in HR and I also worked in fundraising and development. And I also worked in outdoor education. So I worked in a lot of different capacities and a lot of different jobs before I came to grad school. And I thought I'm now in my 30s and I kind of feel like I'm like starting again in my career. And I think that was kind of the mentality that I had after I graduated. I'm like, oh, I'm starting from the beginning, I'm like entry level and things like that. And I think my big lesson learned is that like I have a ton of experience to draw from. And I feel that every day working is like I worked in restaurants and I worked in like the service industry and doing community engagement now. I'm like, I'm totally leveraging those skills and the fact that I got really tough skin working in the service industry, or I worked in outdoor education and I did a lot of facilitation and I do that in my current job. And I'm totally leveraging the experience that I had with youth and doing outdoor education with youth and using that kind of today. So I have all these different kind of disparate experiences that at the time I think I thought, oh, they make my resume look kind of all over the place and super disorganized. And like, I kind of felt like I was starting from zero, but in reality, I think that it's like a huge asset to have a ton of different experiences. And I think I didn't know that for a long time. And I also think that with lived experience too, like it might be professional experience that you're drawing from, but also like the value of lived experience to be able to bring that insight, to be able to leverage that, to use that, and to share that, I think is really huge. And yeah, in my current job, I'm like, it's kind of the culmination of all of my jobs that I've had, and I get to use all the lessons learned from that. And so I would encourage those of you who kind of feel that at all, feel like, oh, I'm starting from scratch, or I'm starting from the beginning. Like I really don't think that's the case. I think that everybody has so much that they're taking from their past experiences and their lived experiences, and bringing that with you. So yeah, I totally encourage you to speak about that, like in interviews, to like all those things are super relevant. And I think that, yeah, it's not only important for the interview, but actually for doing the actual job. I think, yeah, using your experience to kind of solve problems and to push yourself forward is huge.
I love both of those examples. Mine's maybe on the nose. I have a failure to share that I think really did shape where I'm at now. But I had been working on a change initiative for about a year at Google, like in 2019, and it was overhauling the entire company's performance management system. So this is like the intersection of culture, process, people, technology, and pay. And so at the center of this body of work, long story short, was this really robust internal industrial psychology, organizational psychology research by a bunch of PhDs. And that had been very public, like the media knew about it. It's called Project Aristotle, and it's all about team effectiveness. And what we wanted to do was take this research and translate it into a way to hold people accountable for both what they did, but also how they did it. And, how they showed up for work. Were they collaborative? Were they inclusive? And so I was leading stakeholder management at the time with groups of employee resource groups and different workers' councils in different foreign countries where there's laws where workers have a lot of voting power over what the company does, as well as VPs in different divisions. And my VP was working with our CEO's direct leadership team. And so I'm trying to make this short, but basically a fascinating thing happened. We had so many meetings with these C-level executives. They're leading like 30, 40,000 person organizations. And I'm in these meetings like, like, oh, that's a little like in the background. And my VP would do this thing where he would present our plans and he would take silence as consent and agreement. And my gut, and we had many of these meetings where this would happen, and my gut was like, oh, something's off here. Why isn't he asking, how could this fail? What do you disagree with? What are you worried about? But I wasn't confident enough to speak up and say that. And so right at the beginning of the pandemic, we hired a new chief HR officer, and within 1 month, she called a meeting with my VP, myself, and a couple other people and said, we're not doing this. Sorry, throw it all away, because you don't have the right to dictate the company's culture. This has to come from Sundar, our CEO. You're going to have to start over and go about this a very different way. And so that's an entire year's worth of work lost. And it's a very painful lesson to have, like right at the beginning of a time when most of us were just like, what the heck is going on? And so what I learned were 3 things. 1, communicate. Like, you got to say what you mean, even if you don't have perfect information. You don't always have to have perfect data to share your opinion. So I learned hard, like, you've got to be willing to speak up. You're going to save so much money and time pointing out the flaws and being willing to look at the flaws in a project early on rather than waiting until like a year later. The other thing is never underestimate the power of culture. I know Peter Drucker said culture eats strategy for breakfast, and it really is true. It's very important to understand implicit and explicit cultural drivers in an organization when you're trying to lead major initiatives or launch something new. And then I think the final thing would be is that you're all going to, my guess is you're all going to be in a leadership position at some point in your life if you're not already there. And my unsolicited advice from my bad lesson here is that if you're trying to influence others, it's good to be willing to be influenced yourself. Like going into a negotiation with a mindset of I've got to win is probably going to lead to a lose-lose situation. And exactly, influenced by listening. If you can go in with an open mind and a willingness to have like a productive conflict, I think you come out with better results in the end. And this shapes everything I do now with leaders. So kind of a junky lesson to learn, but I'm glad I learned it.
Yeah, sometimes those really hard lessons come with being able to have that self-reflection with yourself. Yeah. So I know this is kind of can be kind of a big question. Considering the constant changes happening in the world politically, and oftentimes coming and showing up to work can be really difficult, or maybe even your work environment might be very challenging. And so I'd love to know, this can be from the smallest and the silliest thing to the deepest thing ever. But what brings you the most fulfillment in your work? And how do you stay motivated when setbacks and challenges are happening?
So I have two answers. I don't often get beaten down. So most often when I work, my team is fully remote, so we can communicate over Slack. So if I'm feeling grumpy, I will start just peppering my colleagues with one-liners or knock-knock jokes, like just stupid jokes. And and it leaves me giggling here by myself in my basement. That usually does the trick. But there are definitely times, and my organization is a cluster. Also, every organization is a cluster. It's just a matter of finding one where the fulfillment outweighs the disappointments. Anyways, when things get really, really hard, what helps me is to remove myself. And I'm like, I can just physically walk away. It's just, this is where my work is. But physically remove myself and go inward and figure out like, what are my unique skills that I bring? And then once I can figure that out, then I can start seeing, okay, well, based on my superpowers, this is what I bring. And that helps me start building a plan B and a plan C and a plan D. And from there, then I've got a path forward. And so there's always that, like, as long as there's a path forward, I'm good. But for me, it's kind of a mix of laughing and being silly, and then also removing myself and focusing inward.
It's really different for me now working for myself, but really quickly, I think for me, the most fulfilling part about my career now is when I'm working with a client one-on-one and they have a significant insight and it's something that's going to change the course of their life or their career or their leadership journey. And you can just see it. It's like a physical shift. And they realize maybe like what's been holding them back all these years. And they make a conscious choice to get out of their own way and start having confidence or change a behavior. And when I can see someone really start to like tap into and believe in their own inner resourcefulness and creativity, it's like such a privilege and it's so fulfilling because it's like watching this person come alive and grow. At Google, for me, it was the moments when I knew we had really done our best to listen to what employees needed or candidates and solve for those needs and the resources and the processes that we built. But it's hard. Working on my own is really kind of lonely. I'm an extrovert, so it's been a little bit challenging. But like what helps me stay motivated and fulfilled are like three things. One, I have an accountability buddy and we meet once a month and we just check in on each other about how we're doing in our career. It's a really safe space to be ourselves. So that I love that. And then two, kind of a dorky thing, but I have an annual plan that is like very organized and I hold myself accountable to it and update it every month to see how I'm doing and if I'm on track and to see if I need to reassess my goals. And then finally, I have a mentor. She's like a mentor coach, and I meet with her twice a month, and she is my lifesaver. I don't know what I'd do without her. So
Wow, Kristen, I love your three tips. I like the accountability buddy. I feel like I need that in my life. Um, yeah, I think for me, I feel really fulfilled at work. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I actually really like my day-to-day like job and what I get to be a part of. Um, I feel really lucky in that I get to work on really interesting projects. The way that Burke works is that you're on like usually like 6 to 8 projects at one time. So in the Evans kind of sphere, I feel like it's kind of like having like 6 to 8 capstone projects, which if you're having a good capstone experience, that's like thumbs up. But if you're not, I feel like people's reactions are like, oh no, that sounds really hard. But I feel like the difference is that I get to like work with a lot of amazing people who I feel very aligned with in terms of my values and um, kind of having this idea of wanting to be a part of something like greater and having a positive impact. I think that's like very, very aligned. Um, and yeah, I feel like I get to learn a lot like every day. And I think that's just the nature of like being on so many projects at one time. It's a lot of varied clients from like state agencies to local government. It's a lot of different topics. And then it's a lot of different tasks like at a day-to-day level. So it's really like dynamic and interesting. And I think it just fits in terms of what I want in terms of a job. So I feel really lucky in that I'm like actually excited about the work I get to do, which I think makes a really big difference because I know I've had jobs where I don't feel that way, and I know the impact that it can have on like the rest of your life. So yeah, I think I'm just in a lucky spot where I found a good fit for now.
Kristen, I think what you were sharing is with your three that keep you fulfilled really kind of jump into our career advice as well. I think finding a mentor is a big one. I'm still also trying to personally find a mentor myself. But I'd love to know any specific practical, tangible pieces of career advice or application advice. There's folks that are still have one more year to go in the program or are thinking of graduating soon. There's a chance that we might have a few alumni on here as well. But the application process is grueling at times and really hard not to get down on yourself. So what career or application advice do you have?
I am happy to start. This is a hard one, but the number one advice I have is network. Network, network, network. It is the only way that I coach people on careers. And this is the way that people are getting jobs. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And that means being expansive with who you know, going a degree or two away from your core network, being willing to ask for introductions, right? And I want to just double click on that with the 2 pieces of supporting advice. One is when you are networking, it's really important to know your why. Why do you want to work at that organization? What values does it honor for you? How does it fit into the bigger picture of your life? So be clear about that for yourself, even if you're not going to share all of that. And then also, why are you in the best position to work for that organization? So that's one thing. It's really helpful to understand that storyline. And the second thing I would say, just because I've learned the hard way by making connections for people, is if someone this seems like a no-brainer, but I've worked with people who have master's degrees who've done this. If someone makes a connection for you, follow through. My bridges have been burnt by making connections for people who then didn't follow through on these connections they said they really wanted. And it was really, I'll be honest, it was really embarrassing for me. And so now I really don't, I'm very, very picky about who I'll make a connection for. So just be credible, follow through, send that email that says thank you, or it sounds so basic, but apparently it's not. So that's that. But I think knowing your why and networking like crazy is really important. And maybe don't apply for 500 jobs on LinkedIn because you're going to be wasting your time. And I'm happy to talk more about that offline.
I was thinking from the perspective of like that, yeah, getting the interview, which is probably once you have the interview, it's preparing for it. I wish somebody had told me, because I'm kind of a class clown. My advice is over preparing for your interview. And I do have I have notes here, so bear with me while I review my notes on this. But like, come up with pages of questions that you think a company might ask you. Write down your answers, then solicit your insights from your friends because they're going to see things that you don't see, the good stuff about you, and also the things you kind of need some work on. Once you've got that, come up with 3 to 5 stories, experientials that you've had that frame you in an amazing light. And then keep honing those 3 to 5 stories so that you can answer just about any question by sharing those stories. Also be tenacious. I would love to, I'm happy to connect with anybody afterwards, but I was interviewing for my job for a year. I interviewed for the job. I prepared my ass off. I didn't get it, but I made friends with the CEO and I put myself on his calendar for quarterly lunches. And a year later, he had a job and hired me. And I had to interview, I had to interview all over again, but like, be tenacious.
Yeah, I love what both of you shared. I completely second both of those things. I think another thing, Christina, that I would add to your like making sure that you're preparing for interviews too is prepare the questions that you ask at the end for the interviewer. I've been in tons of interviews and I also worked in HR, and that's like also a place where you can shine. So definitely take the opportunity to like ask questions, obviously, that you want to know. But I also feel like you're definitely evaluated on the types of questions that you ask at the end. So don't skip on that. What I wanted to share, just because I feel like I recently was applying to tons of jobs in 2023, and this is kind of very specific, but I found it really helpful, is saving the job description for the jobs that you apply for, especially when you're in the time where you're like applying for a bunch of jobs. I found it really helpful to like PDF and save the job description because those job descriptions can come down and then they reach out to you like 3 weeks after you've applied and you're like, what job was this and what were the specific details? So I always save the job description and like have a folder that you're saving all of this to. I also found it again very useful to have a base document of my resume with like all the different tasks or descriptions for each job. And then for me, I was in the climate policy track, the environmental policy track, and then I was also applying to like generalist type jobs. And so I had kind of 3 different types of resumes that I was sending out, but I had this base resume. And then for each job, so let's say I was applying to a climate job, I would have a climate specific resume that I was really editing and coming back to that base resume and saying, oh, okay, this is a really good one to bring in. Oh, these points are not relevant for this job. And so I had kind of variations of resumes that were going, and I think it was really helpful, especially now being on the other end of reviewing resumes too, to kind of be strategic about what you're listing in terms of what you did for that job and making sure that it's really aligning with the job that you're applying for. So don't I personally would not just send one resume to like all the jobs, especially if you have like different focus areas that you're going for. So it takes less time when you have that base document where you're really just copying and pasting and thinking about which ones are more relevant than others. So yeah, that's my advice on resumes.
I wanted to give Justin a bit of space to share something as well.
Thank you so much. I just, as someone who spends a lot of time working with students and alumni on this, I felt like jumping in and want to thank the three of you for everything you said. I think that was spot on advice for our students and alumni. Something I want to share with our students that I am not sure that everyone knows. A good way to know who is an Evans alumni from organizations that you are interested in is on LinkedIn. If you search an organization, under advanced filters, you can filter for specifically the Evans School, so you can see just who is alumni at that organization. And what I have found with our alumni is they want to help you. They want to be there with you on this journey. They are so thankful for the people that helped them, and they want to help you. So I would really, as they all said, reach out to these people, be energetic, talk about your love for the school, the love of the jobs that you're applying for. But definitely utilize our alumni. That is the best part of being an Evans graduate, I think, is the alumni. And so really utilize those people to the best of your ability.
Yes, thank you so much, Justin. Well, I'm actually going to transition this into a Q&A time for any of you students that have questions. Feel free to unmute yourself, turn on your camera and ask your question, or if you'd like to put it in the chat, I can also read it out loud for you. So I'll just give you a moment if you'd like to ask a question.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Schreiber. Since I turned my camera on, I thought I would ask a question. Thank you so much for hosting this today. And I'm an EMPA graduate from class of 2022. So I would love to just hear more about networking. I completely understand, as I've really started the full-time job search, how important it is. And what you guys have already said is exactly what I've been thinking about and trying to do. So I don't know if there's maybe any other little tidbits of networking advice that you might have in addition to what you've already shared, which has been great.
Yeah, I can talk about a couple things that come to mind. And also, if someone reminds me, it's really old, Caitlin, but there's an article, I'm obsessed with Harvard Business Review. There's an article from, I think it's like 2019 or 2017 that talks about thinking about networking in a different way that I find really helpful. But one of the things that I would say is, hopefully you have this, but if you haven't already, building a network map. So like, what are the different areas of your life where you have connections, kind of doing your first order connections in that area, seeing who's in a job that you might be interested in, and then mining, this might be really basic, so I apologize, but mining their LinkedIn for people who you feel might be aligned with you, and then asking for an introduction. And then if they're not willing to give you an introduction, or they don't get back to you, something similar to like what Isa said about having her baseline resume, and then adapting it to different jobs. I think there's a baseline kind of know your why, like why I'm interested and why I want to talk to you. You could have like a few of them. And sometimes it's as simple as, I want to transition to a career in X. I see that you've led a career in that. Would you be willing to talk to me? That's pretty basic, and people probably do get a lot of emails like that. But you could experiment a little bit and think about, well, are there certain things that you're very curious about a career? And add those into your outreach. Like, so for example, I have to do this for my own job, and I'm reaching out to VPs and I'm saying things like, blah, 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 I run my own business. I'm very curious how you are approaching uncertainty as a leader, specifically reorgs, layoffs, et cetera. I'd love to learn what you're finding works and doesn't work. And I'm talking to people across the sector. Would you be willing to spend like 25 minutes with me? And then from there, it kind of naturally comes up like, oh, what do you do? What are you interested in? So that's just another spin on that. But the final thing I'll say is, it is helpful to have a plan and hold yourself accountable to like, okay, I'm going to reach out to 2 people a day or 5 people a week. So you don't feel overwhelmed and you get a sense of progress, even if you're not getting responses. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's better advice.
No, it's really good.
I would also say, I find that people are very open to talking. I don't know if I'm just in a circle where people are just like totally encouraging of people reaching out and cold emailing. And yeah, I'm definitely in an environment where people are constantly doing that. And I think specifically with Burke Consulting, like we have folks reaching out to us all the time. And I always talk to anybody who reaches out showing interest. So I totally would recommend like sending that email. And I think especially having conversation with folks that have reached out to me, I think it makes a really big difference when people like come prepared with like specific questions. It makes it much easier for me. And I also think that it's really helpful if you have an idea of what you're interested in because I've then pass them on to other folks or, oh, if you're interested in this, I recommend you talking to these folks. So if you have a kind of a clear objective of things that you're interested in, I think it'll just keep snowballing to new people, especially if that is of interest. But yeah, just I think baseline is like I need to listen to myself, but like just reaching out, I think is
Mhm.
huge.
Also, understanding whether you're an introvert or an extrovert and coming to that networking from a really genuine place that gives you energy is important, because if you're faking it, everybody's gonna know and it's gonna suck and you're not gonna you will not have joy. I think everyone needs more joy. So even for folks who are introvert, and I don't know you, Caitlin, or don't have the impression that you necessarily are, but like
Mhm.
thinking about going to events where people that are like the kinds of people you want to meet are going, there is no replacement for in-person networking and all the fantastic accidental conversations that you have. So find a place, whether you're an extrovert and you like a room of strangers is just friends you haven't made yet, or even if you're an introvert, there are ways that you could hover by like the name tag table and start like trying to find who do you want to talk to, or ways that you can maybe follow LinkedIn and say, hey, I saw you this post, you said you're going, I'd love to meet you there. There are ways you can leverage that, whether you're a people person or a quiet person.
Cecilia, I saw you turn on your camera. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes, that'd be great. Hi, everyone. My name is Cecilia, and I do have to leave at 2, but I really appreciate this opportunity because I already graduated many, many years ago in 2020, and I just saw an email popped up in my email, like the inbox, that we have this online meeting for this private sector job hunting like advice thing. So I just attended this, and it's been super helpful. I guess one of my question is, so I currently work like for community economic development area, like for one of the nonprofits in Seattle, and I'm hoping to like actually get into private sectors because I'd like to maybe improve, like I'd like to have like a better like work efficiency and like a faster pace work environment, and maybe even make more money, yeah, for sure. But eventually my question is like I do have concerns for transferring my skills to like a private company, and what would your advice to be like what kind of like what should I pay attention to when I apply for those jobs, and what are the experience that you have or your friends, peers have like when they transfer from public or nonprofit sector to private sectors? Yeah, thank you.
Really, okay, Christina has a thing in there, but I really quickly, Cecilia, that was a really good question. One thing that comes to mind is to know the language of the organization that you're applying to. I was really shocked about how Google spoke differently than I spoke. Like when I went back, there was so much jargon. So if you can find people who are maybe in that organization or in an adjacent or a similar organization and talk to them about like what's most important. What are the biggest business goals for that organization? What are their biggest priorities? What's pressure are they under? And just start to listen to how they talk about that can help you think about, okay, I know how to tell the story about how my nonprofit experience can help them meet those business goals. So that would be my advice.
Also look for like folks in CSR, corporate social responsibility, or ESG, environmental, the sustainability and governance, I think is what it is. Folks in those roles tend to have nonprofit backgrounds and are less prejudiced against us soft nonprofit folks who are arguably smarter and work harder. But I think that's a great place to start. Like, find some folks in CSR, ask for their advice, and also ask for connections. They might be able to help make some intros for you.
We do have a question in the chat from Megan. I'm a part-time student who did not have to complete the internship requirement, given a decade of work experience in direct social services, but now I feel lost. I feel like I lost an opportunity to network by doing an internship. I am now trying to find one, but not having much luck. Any advice for finding consulting internships? I know that you all kind of answered a little bit in the chat, but do you want to expand on anything?
What I see is rather than looking for consulting, maybe open up your aperture a bit more to looking at like volunteer opportunities, whether it's board work, which tends to be longer term, or committee work, which could be shorter term. I think that gives you a great place to connect with other people who are on those boards or committees, who can see your work in action.
I don't have anything to add. I think that's brilliant advice.
Great. Isa, was there anything you wanted to add?
Gosh, not really. I think the only thing, I'm sure, Megan, you're already doing this, but I found all 3 of the internships that I was doing through the, gosh, what is it called, Rachel? The Evans like online portal with the jobs.
We
it
actually
called?
don't use it anymore.
Oh, you don't use it
Jobs-
anymore.
Evans,
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you don't use Evans Jobs anymore. Oh no.
we now use Handshake.
Okay, you use Handshake. Okay. Well, that was how I found all of my opportunities, was through that. And I don't know how it's managed differently now, but yeah, I browse that basically every day.
Any other questions from folks?
I have another question, and this is just one I'm genuinely curious about, as I've been looking for the full-time jobs and opportunities, and I'm kind of a generalist, communications, events, community engagement. I've been pleased to see a more opportunity than I thought I would in these areas post-COVID, and I'm just really curious if you have seen. I think we're all seeing a desire to reconnect post-COVID, and especially since I did my degree during COVID. I'm just wondering how you've seen this in your own organizations, if you think this trend will continue. Like, is there more of a desire to network in person? Are you seeing new events or even maybe new organizations pop up because of kind of this desire and the need that we're all realizing that we need? I'm just curious.
So I have an interesting perspective on this. So my organization, we're a trade association, and we help like founders and small businesses like get up and running because they're jackies of all trades who are just trying to get things going. And what we have found, especially over COVID, is again, like there's no replacement for that business development, and especially folks in like small businesses are looking to events to get connections and build their own business connections. But at the same time, membership organizations across, whether it's like I'm also in Junior League of Seattle, and like AFP, Association of Fundraising Professionals, is another one, and like Rotary clubs and executive orgs. Membership in all those orgs has been trending down for years and years and years. So I would say yes, networking events, but don't necessarily stop looking like in like the traditional kinds of places.
Yeah, I think Christina has more insight than I do, and Issa, I'm sure too, is that I think the one thing I'll add is that I am seeing a lot of the institutions in the tech sector that I kind of follow, the thought leaders, organizations, the trade organizations, HR, et cetera, they're starting to have, for the last couple of years, their conferences in person again, and I know people are going to them and they're prioritizing it. So yes, it does seem like there's a shift to wanting to be in person and prioritizing that, but I don't really have any data to say how that will, how that plays out locally.
Kaylin, were you also asking about like what we're seeing in our workplaces in terms of what they're offering, or is it more about your own networking?
Oh,
and
no,
those
yeah, no, I think that I think it's interesting to just see what you're seeing in your
Yeah.
organization. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
I
these
would
have been
say,
great answers.
yeah. I would say I work with a lot of like local government and state agencies and stuff, and we do a lot of like community engagement events. And yeah, there's definitely been an interest to do in-person like tabling events and in-person like outreach events. And much less so of those are happening virtually now. I think that still a lot of like the one-on-one interview type engagement is virtual, and I feel like that probably won't change. But yeah, I would say like all of the events and stuff are now in person, and I feel like our clients want that in person kind of work and outreach.
I have one more question in the chat from Telly. I have a question on networking and job searching from someone with international experience and limited network in Seattle. What do you have any more information on this question, or do you want to expand on this? How to build one. So how to build a network when you have international experience and limited network in Seattle.
I think Justin's advice was really good, which is, going on LinkedIn, doing a filter for Evans, maybe targeting a few international organizations that are based in Seattle as a first entry point, and going broad and deep in the sense of like, yes, there's Gates, but there's also PATH and IFPRI, and of course, all these poor organizations are really probably struggling right now figuring out their funding. But going really broad with what those organizations are, and doing a search for Evans alum and just cold outreaching is what I would say.
And Kristen, I think I saw you put this in one of your comments, but with every informational interview you have, end on the question, who can you introduce me to?
Yeah, totally agree with both of you. I feel like I can't stress enough the Evans network and community. It's so big in Seattle. I'm like constantly surprised meeting people, and yeah, like there's so many Evans alum, and I feel like there's kind of just an automatic built-in connection and support there. I've felt that when I started a new job and there's other Evans people. I'm like, oh wow. And I feel like there's already kind of that like partnership there. So I think that's a huge part of the education and like the benefit of going to Evans is it's a really big network in Seattle. So totally leverage that. Absolutely. And I think that people are that much more willing to speak with other Evans people too. Speaking for myself, like when someone reaches out who's an Evans alum, I'm like, oh, it's so exciting. Like automatically I'm like, oh, we have something in common there. So yeah, definitely using that Evans connection, I think is huge, and I would definitely encourage that.
I'm also just going to jump in really quickly, adding on to everything that you all said. I have met with like over 100 alumni in the last year, and I have not come across one that has not said that every single one has said they want to talk to students, and that they're willing to chat with people. And so don't be afraid. When I was going through this and trying to network myself, and I got nervous and anxious, I didn't want to bother people or be a burden. I often think about that if someone were to reach out to me, I would be more than happy to chat with them about where I'm at and what I'm doing and how I got here. And most people feel the exact same way. And of course, you're going to run across people who are too busy to chat, but that's rare. And so if you don't get a message back from someone, don't be deterred. Keep going, keep reaching out to different people. And again, people want to help. So just keep that in the back of your mind. People, especially Evans alumni, want to help.
I love that. You just reminded me, Justin, of this little anecdote of when I graduated Evans. I was working at this organization called Philanthropy Northwest, and it also is a trade organization. And my colleague had an MPA from Columbia, and she will remain nameless. But the funniest thing was, she said, we were sitting in the office together, and she said, dang it, I should have gone to Evans if I had planned to move back here, because it was so hard for me to find a job because I had no network. All of my network is in New York City. And so like, she's like, you have an advantage over me, even though, we were doing the same job. She's like, you had an advantage over me and having that. So I can't like double click on that enough or do the little finger snaps to what you just said.
I'd also love to share that even, yes to alumni, yes to connecting with alumni, yes to cold emailing, direct messaging, any of those things. But at the same time, maintaining the relationships with the folks that you have in your current classes, as well as your faculty and the staff you interact with. Because like these folks are saying, some of the professors they had are still here and have been professors for, the other folks as well. And they know people. And they can connect you with their community as well. And your peers are your first network. So being able to still maintain relationship with them, especially if you are maybe an international student, that you need more domestic connections, developing relationships with your classmates and developing relationships with other international classmates as well. Because folks might be working full time and might be able to connect you with something. Yeah. Any other questions or any other maybe like final pieces of wisdom that folks want to share? It looks like we might wrap up a little bit early.
I love the show 30 Rock. It's old now, but there's a scene where a woman says, if you dress well and and walk with confidence, you can get into anywhere. And that's it, right? Like, it's so easy to be like, oh, well, I just got my MPA and I don't have that much experience, and like, screw that. You're already better prepared than 2/3 of the candidates out there, experience or no. And so I think, Caleb, we should totally hang out and like watch 30 Rock reruns together. But I think that's the most important thing, is like, own who you are, and who you are is not just a list of your like past jobs. It's really like all of the things that make you who you are, because and this is granted, this is after you've been pulled in for an interview, but ultimately people want to hire somebody who's going to make them look good and like do good work, but also somebody they kind of want to hang out with, right? Like, nobody wants to hire a colleague who sucks. So just, breathe a little bit easier and know who you are and be comfortable with that.
Yeah, I would say the one thing that just came to mind for me is along that theme too, is just like, don't let the fear of rejection stop you from going for what you want. Because the reality is we tell ourselves a lot of story about our value and our worth and, you know, I'm going to get this, I'm not going to get that. We're thinking about it way more than the other person is. And so, challenge yourself to go for it, whether it is the networking outreach, or, you know, applying for a stretch job. So yeah, just don't let the fear of failure get in your way is my piece of advice.
I'd add on to that, Kristen, and I think I'm someone that like would count myself out before even applying to the job. And with my experience with Burke, I applied for a job that I was like, I'm not qualified for this, and I actually kind of wasn't qualified for that job, but they actually created another job for me. And so I think it was a big lesson learned in terms of like, don't count yourself out, just like apply for the job and then see what happens. And I think, yeah, that was a big lesson learned for me, and I'm still learning from that. But I would definitely encourage folks to just apply for the job with confidence.
Any other final questions or final thoughts before we wrap this up? Okay, well, our lovely panelists have also added their emails if you would like to follow up with them, get some practice in that networking, get some practice in those cold emailing. Well, now it's no longer cold, it's like a little warm. It's like springtime. But yeah, thank you all for being here, and we will have this also recorded and saved for folks to go back and watch it again, so you can hear all the wisdom a second time if you'd like. But thank you all again for being here, and I hope you stay warm in this weather wherever you are.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.